You threw Eleanor's ring in the trash. I said it quiet, the way you'd read a grocery list, because if I said it any louder my voice would have broken in half. It was 6:40 on a Tuesday evening, the kitchen still smelling like the pot roast nobody had touched, and I was standing over the pull-out bin under the sink with a ring box in my hand, empty, and a smear of coffee grounds where the ring itself had landed. My name is Walter Combs. I'm 71 years old, a widower, retired, and until that Tuesday, I thought I understood exactly what was left of my life. Pause. I didn't know yet that finding that ring in the trash would be the last ordinary thing that ever happened in that house. Eleanor and I were married 44 years. We met at a hardware store, if you can believe that. She was buying paint. I was buying nothing, just wandering the aisles because my apartment was too quiet on Saturdays. She picked a color called Harvest Gold, and I told her it looked like baby food. She married me anyway, 6 months later, in her mother's backyard under a maple tree that's still there, though the family that owns the house now has cut half its branches off. We didn't have money starting out. I worked the line at a machine shop for 11 years before I got into estate appraisal, which is its own strange story. A man I fixed a lawnmower for turned out to be a probate attorney, and he needed somebody who could tell the difference between a real Tiffany lamp and a knockoff. Eleanor typed up my first reports on a manual typewriter at our kitchen table, correcting my spelling, feeding our son Danny his dinner with the other hand. She gave up a nursing scholarship the year we got married so we could save for a house. She never once brought it up as a sacrifice. I brought it up. She'd just wave her hand and say, "I got the better deal, Walt. I got you." She wore that ring every day for 44 years. A simple half carat, nothing fancy, but I'd had it reset twice. Once when the band wore thin, once after she lost so much weight during her treatments that it kept slipping off her finger and she was terrified of losing it in a hospital sink somewhere. She died 14 months ago. Ovarian cancer, 11 months from diagnosis to the end. I held that ring on her finger the last night in the hospice, and when they finally slipped it off for me the next morning, my hands were shaking so bad the nurse had to help me get it into the little manila envelope they give you. I moved in with my son Danny and his wife Priya about 7 months after the funeral. My idea, not theirs, or at least I told myself that. The house Eleanor and I shared felt like a museum nobody was visiting. Danny said, "Dad, we've got the guest room. It's practically an apartment." And Priya smiled and said all the right things, and I believed her, because I wanted to. For the first few months it was fine. Better than fine. I helped with their daughter, Maya, who was 6 and thought my hearing aids were robot ears, and liked to whisper into them. I cooked on Sundays. I paid what I called rent, though Danny kept saying I didn't have to, $3,000 a month into their account, because I still had my appraisal income and a modest pension, and I did not intend to be a burden. It started small. Priya reorganizing the guest room, while I was at the doctor, and donating a box of Eleanor's old cardigans to Goodwill before asking me. A comment here and there. "Walt, do you really need 3 coffee mugs in here? It's a bit much," said with a laugh, like it was nothing. I let it go. You let things go, at that age, because you've learned that most hills aren't worth dying on. Then it was the framed photo of Eleanor and me on our 40th anniversary, moved from the hallway to a shelf in the laundry room, because Priya said it didn't match the entryway aesthetic. Then it was Maya being told, gently but firmly, that Grandpa's stories about Grandma were a lot for a 6-year-old, and could we maybe not talk about her so much before bed. I started eating dinner a little earlier, alone, before they sat down as a family. Nobody asked me to. I just did. Danny worked long hours at his firm and mostly wasn't home to see any of it, and when he was, Priya had a way of making everything sound reasonable. "He's just settling in," she'd tell him, when I sat quiet at the table. "It's an adjustment for everyone." 6:40 on a Tuesday. I'd come downstairs because I couldn't find the ring box on my dresser. I kept it there, closed, though I never opened it, because I wasn't ready, and something told me to check the kitchen trash before I panicked and turned the whole house upside down. I looked at the empty box, then at the coffee grounds, then at Priya, who was standing at the counter chopping onions like nothing in the world was wrong. "I was cleaning out the guest room," she said, not even turning around. "I found some old jewelry box in the drawer. It looked cheap, costume stuff." I didn't think. It was Eleanor's wedding ring. She stopped chopping. "I didn't know that's what it was." "You didn't ask." "Walt, I'm sorry, I can go get it. It's probably still in the bag." I already knew it wasn't. Garbage day was Tuesday morning. The truck had come at 7. I'd heard it. Eleanor's ring had been sitting at the curb since before I'd even had my coffee, and by the time I found the empty box, it was somewhere in a landfill 40 minutes outside the city, buried under a day's worth of everyone else's trash. I didn't yell. I want to be clear about that, because in the weeks that followed, people kept expecting me to have yelled, kept looking at me like they'd missed the part of the story where the old man finally lost it. I didn't. I just stood there a moment, looking at that empty box, and then I said, quiet. Okay. That was the whole reaction. Okay. And I walked upstairs. Scene returns to opening, 6:40. The ring box open and empty in my hand. Priya's voice behind me, already sliding from apology into justification, the way people do when they're more sorry about being caught than about what they did. It's just a ring, Walt. She'd want you to move on, wouldn't she? You can't keep everything. I turned around in the doorway. She'd want a lot of things, I said. None of them were this. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the guest bed for a long time. Not crying. Just still. I thought about Eleanor telling me, in her last clear week, don't let anybody make you small, Walt. Not even to be polite. I hadn't understood then what she meant. I understood it now. I picked up my phone and called a number I hadn't dialed in 6 years. Marcus Webb, an estate attorney I'd worked alongside for 2 decades of appraisals, a man whose signature I'd seen on more trust documents than I could count. Marcus, it's Walt Combs. Walt, been a minute. Everything all right? I need to talk about the trust. Eleanor's and mine. I need to know exactly where things stand. There was a pause on the line, the kind lawyers give you when they sense the real question underneath the one you asked. You want to come by tomorrow? I do. My voice was flat the whole call. No drama in it. Just a man asking a straightforward question about a straightforward thing. What Danny and Priya didn't know, what I'd never had reason to bring up, because it simply hadn't mattered before, was that 14 years earlier, after I appraised the estate of a man named Roland Ashby, a widower with no children, he'd been so struck by how I'd handled his late wife's collection, cataloging every piece with a note about who she was, not just what it was worth, that he'd made a decision. When Roland passed 3 years later, I found out his attorney was Marcus Webb, and that Roland had left instructions naming me trustee of a modest family trust meant to benefit individuals demonstrating integrity in the handling of what matters to others. It wasn't a fortune. It was $340,000, sitting untouched, earning interest, for 14 years, because I never needed it and never told anyone it existed. Not even Eleanor, at first, and by the time I told her, we agreed it wasn't ours to spend carelessly. We'd used the income twice, once for Danny's wedding, once, quietly, for a hospice bill Medicare didn't cover. Danny knew there was some money from an old client, Dad's trustee of something. He'd never asked for details. Why would he? His father was the guy who fixed lawnmowers and appraised grandfather clocks, not a man anyone thought to look at twice. I hadn't touched a cent of principal in 14 years. I hadn't planned to touch it now either. But I had planned, that Tuesday night, to make one call that would change how $3,000 a month, an inheritance conversation, and a great deal of assumed comfort would look going forward. The next morning I met Marcus at his office. Gray suit, same reading glasses he'd worn since I met him, a firm handshake and a look that said he already suspected this wasn't a routine visit. I want to redirect the automatic distribution, I told him. Currently going to my checking account, then to Danny and Priya as rent. I want it going into a separate account. Same trust, same terms, different destination. That's simple enough, Marcus said. Can I ask what happened? My wife's ring got thrown in the trash yesterday. On purpose or by carelessness, I still don't fully know which. And at this point, I'm not sure it matters. Marcus set his pen down. I'm sorry, Walt. I don't need anybody sorry. I need the paperwork done today. It'll be done today. I also asked him about something I'd been putting off for over a year, updating my will. Eleanor and I had left everything equally to Danny, with a modest bequest to a hospice foundation. I told Marcus I wanted to think it over, no immediate changes, but I wanted him to draft 2 versions, one as it stood, and one with the residents, Eleanor's and my house, still sitting there, still mine, rented out to a young family since I'd moved, placed instead into a trust for Maya's education, administered independently, outside Danny and Priya's control until she turned 25. You don't have to decide that today, Marcus said. I know. I want it ready, though, in case. That evening, I also called Rosalind Ferris, a longtime neighbor of ours from the old house, a woman who'd known Eleanor for 30 years and had been asking, gently, for months, whether I wanted to come back and rent the little in-law unit behind her place. Her late husband's old workshop, converted years back, sitting empty since he passed. Rosie, I said, is that unit still available? For you? It's been available for you since the day you moved out of your own house, Walt. What happened? I'll tell you Thursday, over coffee. I might be needing it sooner than I thought. Danny called me Wednesday afternoon, his voice tight in a way I recognized from when he was a teenager and knew he was in trouble. Dad, Priya told me about the ring. Dad, I'm so sorry. That shouldn't have happened. No, I said. It shouldn't have. She feels terrible. I believe she feels terrible about being caught. Silence on the line. Then, that's not fair. Maybe not, I said. But it's what I've got. Thursday, Rosalind's kitchen, the smell of coffee and cinnamon, the same table where she and Eleanor used to play cards on Friday nights. I told her the whole thing. The ring, the trash, the $3,000 a month, 14 years of a trust nobody in my own family knew existed. Rosie set her mug down hard enough that coffee sloshed over the rim. Walter Combs, you've been paying that girl $3,000 a month to throw your wife's ring in the garbage. When you say it like that, there's no other way to say it. Friday morning, Marcus called. The redirect was in place. As of the 1st of the following month, the automatic transfer that had been quietly funding roughly a third of Danny and Priya's mortgage payment, because that's what $3,000 a month had actually been covering, something I hadn't fully clocked until Marcus laid it out plainly, would stop. I didn't announce it. I didn't need to. Numbers speak for themselves, eventually. 3 weeks later, Priya called me at Rosalind's, where I was staying temporarily. A word we both knew was doing some heavy lifting. Her voice had a different register than I'd heard from her before, less breezy, more careful. Walt, there's a problem with the mortgage payment this month. Danny's asking if you maybe forgot to transfer. I didn't forget. A pause. So you stopped it? On purpose. I redirected it. To a different purpose. Walt, we budgeted around that money. I know, I said. I did too once. Around a ring that was supposed to stay on my wife's finger until I put it on my own hand in a coffin someday, which was the plan, Priya. That was always the plan. She didn't have an answer for that. Danny showed up at Rosalind's 2 days later, alone, Maya's booster seat still in the back of his car, parked crooked in the driveway like he hadn't thought past getting there. Dad, what is going on? Priya says you moved money. You're not returning our calls the same way. You're staying with Rosie like you're punishing us. I'm not punishing anybody, Danny. I'm just done pretending something didn't happen. It was a mistake. She made a mistake. She threw away the last thing I had that touched your mother's hand for 44 years, and her first instinct wasn't grief on my behalf. It was managing how it looked. That's not a mistake, son. A mistake is breaking a dish. Danny sat down hard on Rosie's porch step. I didn't know it was that bad. The stuff with the photos, I thought that was just Priya being Priya. Type A. I didn't know you'd stopped talking to Maya about Grandma at all. I noticed you didn't know a lot of things, I said, not unkindly. You worked. I understand that. I'm not angry at you for working. Then what are you angry at me for? For not asking me how I was doing more than once every few weeks. For letting $3,000 a month feel like enough of a check-in. He didn't say anything to that. There wasn't much to say. Over the following weeks, the consequences kept surfacing in small pieces, the way water finds every low point in a floor. Danny told me, one Sunday call, that he and Priya had gotten into the worst fight of their marriage over the mortgage shortfall, not over the ring, at first, but over money, which I suppose is its own kind of honesty. It was only after that fight, he said, that Priya had finally told him the full story, not the version she'd given him the first night. She said she knew it was the ring before she threw the bag out. Danny told me, his voice hollow over the phone. She said she almost stopped herself. Almost. Almost isn't a lot of comfort, Danny. No, he admitted. It isn't. Priya's own mother called me around that time, Sarah Anand, a sharp, kind woman I'd always liked, apologizing on her daughter's behalf in the particular way that mothers do when they're mortified. I raised her better than this, Walt. I don't know what got into her. I don't think anything got into her, Sarah, I said. I think she just decided my grief was inconvenient and acted accordingly. People do that. It doesn't make it easier. Priya herself went quiet for almost a month. No calls, no texts, though Danny told me she'd tried to write me something twice and deleted it both times. He said she'd started sleeping badly, that she'd taken the framed anniversary photo, the one she'd moved to the laundry room, and put it back in the hallway herself, without saying anything to anyone, like a confession nobody heard. Then, on a Thursday evening about 5 weeks after the trash can, Priya showed up at Rosalind's alone. No warning call. She stood on the porch in her coat, hands shoved in her pockets, looking about 10 years younger than I'd ever seen her, which is to say, looking scared. "Can I come in?" "You can sit," I said, nodding toward the porch chairs. Rosie's porch, not mine to invite anyone into. She sat. For a long moment neither of us said anything. "I found something," she finally said. "In a box of Danny's mom's things in the attic. Sorry, of Eleanor's things, the ones I hadn't gotten to yet. There was a letter. From her to you. Dated about 6 months before she died. I wasn't looking for it. I was looking for baby clothes for a friend's shower, and it fell out of an old sewing kit. You read it." The first line was already open, on top. I couldn't not. She pulled a folded paper from her coat pocket, hands shaking slightly. I brought it. I didn't think it was mine to keep. I unfolded it. Eleanor's handwriting, smaller and shakier than it used to be, from the last months. I sat with that letter a long moment. Priya was crying quietly beside me, not performing it, just crying. "I read that," she said, "and I thought about the trash can. And I thought, what kind of person does that? Not to a stranger. To you. I don't have an answer that makes you feel better," I said. "I'm not asking you to make me feel better. I threw away something a dying woman told her husband not to let go of, and I did it because it was inconvenient to look at. I don't get to feel better about that. I just wanted you to see the letter. And to say I'm sorry, actually sorry, not sorry I got caught. I've had 5 weeks to sit with the difference. That's the first true thing you've said to me since this started. I know. We didn't hug. We didn't resolve anything that night. But she asked, before she left, if she could come back, not to ask for the money. She said, quickly, before I could think that's what this was, but to ask if she could take Maya to visit Eleanor's grave sometime, so her daughter would have more than a vague, discouraged memory of a grandmother she'd been taught to talk about less. "I'll think about it," I said. It was the most honest answer I had. A few days later, Danny called and asked if I'd come to dinner. Not a reconciliation dinner, he was careful to say, just dinner. I went. Priya cooked, actually cooked, didn't have takeout waiting in the oven the way she sometimes did. Maya ran up and grabbed my hand the second I walked in and whispered into my hearing aid, "Robot ears, tell me a story about Grandma." And I looked at Priya, and Priya looked back at me and gave the smallest nod I've ever seen a person give, and I sat down at their table and told my granddaughter about the day her grandmother picked out a paint color called Harvest Gold and how I told her it looked like baby food. And Maya laughed so hard she nearly fell off her chair, and Priya laughed too. Quiet, a little wet around the eyes. The following month, I restored a portion of the transfer, not the full 3,000, and not automatic anymore, but a monthly contribution toward Maya's future schooling, paid directly into an account Marcus set up, one that Danny and Priya couldn't touch. Only she could, when she turned 18. I told them both what it was for, plainly, at that same table. "This isn't back to how it was," I said. "I'm not moving back in. I like it at Rosie's. I like having my own door to close. But I'm not disappearing from this family either. There's a difference between forgiving and forgetting, and there's a difference between forgetting and staying gone. I'm choosing the middle one." Danny nodded like a man who understood he'd gotten off easier than he deserved. Priya just said, "Thank you." Twice, quiet both times. 2 months after that, on what would have been Eleanor's 72nd birthday, Priya showed up at Rosie's with Maya, holding a small box. Inside was a ring. Not Eleanor's, of course. That one was gone for good, buried under 100 tons of somebody else's discarded life, and no amount of wishing brought that back. This was a plain gold band Priya had found at an estate sale. Nothing valuable, nothing that mattered to anyone else in the world. "I know it's not hers," Priya said. "I know nothing replaces that. I wanted you to have something to hold on to that didn't come from a place of loss. I wanted to give you something instead of the last time I gave you something." I turned it over in my hand. A stranger's ring, worn smooth by some other marriage, some other set of hands. It wasn't Eleanor's. It never would be. But I put it in my pocket, next to my keys, and I have carried it every day since. Not as a replacement, but as a reminder that people can lose their footing and still, eventually, find their way back to solid ground, if you let the door stay open a crack instead of slamming it shut. I think about that Tuesday evening a lot. The coffee grounds. The empty box. I used to believe that the biggest test of love was how you acted in the big moments. Weddings, funerals, diagnoses. I don't believe that anymore. I think the real test is smaller than that. It's whether you notice when you've made someone else feel like their grief is an inconvenience. It's whether you say something before it takes a lawyer's phone call and a stopped mortgage payment to get anybody's attention. I forgave Priya, not all at once, and not because she deserved it in some tidy, earned way, but because Eleanor spent 44 years teaching me that holding on to anger costs you more than it costs the person you're angry at. I kept the trust the way it was always meant to be kept, quiet, useful, not a weapon, not a leash. And I kept that stranger's ring in my pocket, a small, plain thing, worth nothing to anybody but me, which is, I've come to think, exactly what the good things in life usually are. If you've ever had somebody treat your grief like clutter, if you've ever had to decide whether to make noise about it or just quietly change the terms of your own life instead, I'd like to hear how you handled it. Tell me in the comments below. And if this story meant something to you, stay a while. There are more like it here, and I'd be glad for the company.